They applauded my husband's success while I stood beside him smiling, until the screen behind him showed the apartment I'd been unknowingly paying for. That was the moment I realized I wasn't just married to him. I was financing another woman's life. The applause started before I understood why my chest felt tight. We were standing in a hotel ballroom washed in warm light, gold tablecloths, champagne flutes, a string quartet playing something soft and forgettable. My husband squeezed my hand as his name echoed through the room, and people turned to smile at me like I was part of the achievement. "They couldn't have done it without your support," someone said. I smiled back, automatically. On stage, a large screen flickered to life behind the podium. The MC began talking about sacrifice, late nights, long flights, the personal costs of success. Then the slideshow started. Photos meant to humanize the story, to show the life behind the numbers. The first image was an apartment. Bright, minimal, floor-to-ceiling windows. A clean, modern kitchen with pale wood cabinets and a marble island. The kind of place you'd find in a glossy magazine spread titled Urban Calm. My smile froze. I had seen that kitchen before. Not in person, not on social media. In my banking app. I knew the exact curve of the island because I had paid for it. Piecemeal, over 3 years of miscellaneous expenses. I knew the brushed brass faucet because it had shown up as a vendor name I didn't recognize, charged to a card I paid every month. I knew the view from the balcony because it matched the address that appeared, like clockwork, on a monthly transfer I'd once assumed was corporate housing. My husband leaned closer, whispering, "Isn't this nice?" The MC continued, "When we talk about balance, this is what we mean. The space that kept him grounded when the pressure was intense." The room chuckled appreciatively. The slideshow moved on. A living room now. Soft gray couch. Framed prints. A plant by the window I remembered because it had come from a boutique nursery I'd questioned once. "Client gift," he'd said. "High-end account." I swallowed. A woman at our table clinked her glass. "You must be so proud." On stage, the photo changed again. This time, a bedroom. White linen. A bedside lamp with a distinct ceramic base. The same lamp I'd bookmarked online years earlier before deciding it was too expensive. My ears rang. I looked at my husband. He was beaming. Relaxed. The kind of relaxed that comes from believing you're untouchable. He stood when they called his name, buttoned his jacket, and walked toward the podium to more applause. They thanked him for his leadership, for his vision, for the personal sacrifices that made his success possible. They thanked him for the life I had been unknowingly funding. As he spoke, I felt oddly calm, not numb, clear. A click, like a lock turning. This wasn't a fling, not a secret weekend. This was a second life with receipts. Structured, furnished, maintained. A life built on the assumption that I wouldn't look too closely at numbers because love meant trust, and trust meant not asking. I had trusted him. I managed our household finances because it made sense. I paid the bills, balanced the accounts. When he said he needed flexibility for work expenses, I adjusted. When he said reimbursements were delayed, I covered the gap. When he said it would all settle once the promotion came through, I nodded. The promotion had come through. So had the truth. He finished his speech to thunderous applause. People stood. Someone called his name with admiration. He scanned the room and found me, smiling like nothing in the world had changed. I stood too, clapped, met his eyes. Let him believe I was still where he left me. Inside, I was already gone. As the applause faded and the music swelled, I understood something with absolute certainty. I wasn't standing next to a successful man. I was standing next to an expense report. And for years, I had been the line item he never expected to audit. The rest of the night passed in a blur I navigated on instinct. I smiled when people spoke to me. I accepted congratulations meant for him. I laughed at jokes I didn't hear. My body moved through the ballroom like it had rehearsed this moment for years. Pleasant, supportive, invisible. Inside, I was cataloging. Not emotions, evidence. Every time someone thanked me for holding things together at home, I nodded and mentally added another item to the list. Every compliment about his discipline, his restraint, his sacrifice, tightened the clarity in my chest. This wasn't recklessness. This wasn't impulse. This was budgeting. On the ride home, he was buoyant. Looser than he'd been in months. "They're talking about another promotion," he said, adjusting his tie. "Can you believe that?" I looked out the window. "I can." He laughed, mistaking my tone for agreement. "I told you all those late nights would pay off." Late nights. I thought about the transfers that always hit on the first of the month. The credit card charges coded as housing support. The occasional lump sums he explained away as short-term loans to colleagues. "Temporary," he'd always said. "I'll pay it back." I had never pushed. At home, he poured himself a drink and loosened his collar. "I'm exhausted," he said, "but tonight made it worth it." I watched him from the kitchen doorway. The man I had married. The man who had learned how to lie without raising his heart rate. "I'm going to shower," he said. "Don't wait up." When the bathroom door closed, I opened my laptop. Not dramatically, not angrily. Methodically. I logged into our bank account, then the credit card portal. I pulled statements going back 5 years and sorted them by category, then by vendor. Patterns emerged immediately. Clean, precise, unashamed. Rent, utilities, furniture, maintenance, groceries. Not business expenses, a household. I opened the address tied to the largest recurring transfer, the same one I'd glimpsed on the screen earlier. A quick search brought up a listing photo. The apartment. The same marble island. The same view. The same bedroom lamp. I sat back in my chair and exhaled slowly. There was no spike of rage. No panic. Just a strange sense of validation. The kind you feel when a question finally answers itself. This wasn't about love. It was about entitlement. He believed my labor, my income, my organization, my trust were resources he could allocate without discussion. He believed my role was to sustain the structure while he lived inside it however he chose. The shower turned off. I closed my laptop. That night, I lay beside him while he slept easily, one arm thrown across the bed like he owned all the space. I stared at the ceiling and replayed moments I'd dismissed over the years. The way he never invited me to his corporate housing, the way he discouraged me from visiting his office after hours, the way he flinched when I suggested combining all accounts for simplicity. I hadn't missed the signs. I had trusted the explanations. In the morning, he left early, energized by praise. I made coffee and sat at the table alone, sunlight pooling across the floor. I didn't confront him. Not yet. Because once you see the full structure of a lie, you don't rush to knock it down. You trace the beams. You learn where the weight is carried. You decide what happens when support is removed. I called in sick to work and spent the day doing something I had never done in our marriage. I audited my own life. I separated my income. I redirected deposits. I froze the card tied to business flexibility. I documented everything. Screenshots, timelines, totals. By evening, I had a number. Not just the cost of the apartment. The cost of the years. When he came home, humming to himself, I asked him one simple question. "How long has she been living there?" He stopped. Not slowly, not cautiously. Completely. For a fraction of a second, the man I'd seen on stage, the composed executive, disappeared. Then he smiled. "What are you talking about?" I met his eyes. "The apartment. The one you showed your colleagues tonight." The smile didn't falter, but his breath did. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he set his keys down carefully, too carefully, like the sound might betray him. He walked past me into the kitchen, poured himself a glass of water, and drank it slowly. buying time, reorganizing. I don't know what you think you saw, he said finally, his voice light, almost amused. Those slides are put together by marketing. I stayed seated. Marketing doesn't pay rent. He turned then, frowning, as if I'd misunderstood something simple. You're jumping to conclusions. I recognize the vendors, I replied. The address, the furniture. I pay the statements. His jaw tightened for a fraction of a second. Then the mask slid back into place. Okay, he said, exhaling like I was exhausting him. Let's not do this tonight. That was his favorite line. Not denial, deferral. He'd always believed time softened things, that if he waited long enough, I'd doubt myself. I already did it tonight, I said. I did it this afternoon. I traced everything. He laughed, a single, incredulous sound. You went through my accounts? Our accounts, I corrected. The ones I fund. That changed his posture. He leaned back against the counter, arms crossing. Defensive now, irritated. So this is about money, he said. You're upset about expenses. This is about a second household, I replied. One I've been paying for. He stared at me, recalculating. When he spoke again, his tone shifted. Lower, more intimate. The voice he used when he wanted me to feel unreasonable. You're being paranoid, he said. I knew this job would stress you out. I felt something harden inside me. Not anger. Resolve. Tell me her name, I said. He scoffed. There is no her. Then tell me why there are groceries charged every week to an apartment you don't live in, I said. Tell me why utilities are in your name. Tell me why your company thanked you for the space that kept you grounded. Silence. He looked away first. That was the answer. It's not what you think, he said quickly. It started as a work arrangement. How long? I asked. He rubbed his face. A couple of years. My chest tightened. And the woman? He hesitated. She stays there sometimes. Sometimes. I nodded slowly. So I'm not wrong. He shook his head. You're overreacting. There it was. You didn't ask, he continued. You never wanted details. You always said you trusted me. I stood up then. Trust doesn't mean ignorance. He stepped closer. I needed balance. You know how intense my work is. So you outsourced your life, I said. On my budget. He flinched. That's unfair. What's unfair, I replied, is letting me pay for your affair and applauding it in public. He snapped. It's not an affair, it's complicated. I almost smiled. Complicated meant indefensible. I walked past him into the bedroom and closed the door. Not to escape, but to retrieve something. I came back with my phone, screen lit. I've frozen the card, I said, redirected my income, documented every transfer. His face drained of color. You can't do that. I already did. You're trying to ruin me, he said, his voice rising. No, I replied calmly. I'm stopping the funding. He stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time. Not as a partner, but as a variable he hadn't accounted for. You're being dramatic, he said weakly. I shook my head. You thought I was the budget. Turns out I was the sponsor. For a long moment neither of us spoke. The house felt different now. Smaller. Stripped of illusion. Finally, he said, what do you want? I looked at him and realized the answer was simple. I want my life back, I said, and you're not in it. He opened his mouth to argue. I didn't wait, because the moment I stopped paying for his lies, they started collapsing on their own. He didn't leave that night. Not because he thought things could be fixed, but because he didn't know where to go once the funding stopped. He slept on the couch. I slept in the bedroom with the door locked, my phone charging beside me like a witness. I didn't cry. I didn't spiral. I lay there cataloging what mattered and what didn't, and the list was shorter than I expected. In the morning, he tried a different approach. Apologies. Careful ones, strategic ones. I never meant for it to go this far, he said over coffee I didn't drink. You know I was under pressure. Pressure, always pressure, as if stress explained ethics. I opened my laptop and slid it across the table. This is 3 years, I said. Rent, utilities, furniture, groceries, travel, insurance. Do you want to explain which part of that was accidental? He stared at the screen, then back at me. You're making this transactional. It always was, I replied. I just didn't know the terms. He leaned back, exhaling sharply. You're acting like I stole from you. You did, I said. You just called it marriage. That was the moment he got angry. Not explosive, cold. You benefited too, he said. My success paid for this life. Our life, I corrected. Not hers. He scoffed. You're going to blow everything up over one mistake? One mistake is forgetting an anniversary, I said. This was a lifestyle. He stood up. So what? Now you're some kind of martyr? No, I said. I'm done subsidizing your choices. By noon, he was on the phone. Low voice, pacing, whispering urgently. I recognized the tone. Crisis management. Damage control. He believed he could still rearrange things if he moved fast enough. He was wrong. By the end of the day, the other woman called me. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail, polite, controlled, almost rehearsed. I didn't know you were paying, she said. He told me it was company housing. I deleted it without responding. Whether she knew or not didn't change the structure. The life she was living had been built on my silence and my salary, and now that silence was gone. That night, he packed a bag, not because I asked him to, but because the apartment he'd been using as an escape was suddenly unavailable. Accounts frozen, cards declined, doors closed. He stood in the hallway with his bag like a man waiting for instructions. I need time, he said. You've had years, I replied. He left without slamming the door, without drama, without apology that meant anything. The next weeks were procedural. I met with a lawyer, changed passwords, separated finances cleanly and permanently. The numbers were worse than I'd expected, but also clearer. Seeing the total didn't devastate me. It clarified me. This hadn't been love misdirected. It had been entitlement resourced. At work, people mentioned the celebration again. How inspiring it had been. How lucky I must feel to be part of it. I smiled and changed the subject. Because the truth doesn't need to be announced to be effective. What mattered was that the money stopped flowing. The apartment emptied. The illusion lost its oxygen. When he tried to negotiate, asked if we could talk about support, I declined. I already supported your other life, I said. I'm not funding the aftermath. He accused me of cruelty. I called it accuracy. The night I slept through without checking my phone, without waiting for the other shoe to drop, I realized something quietly profound. I hadn't lost a husband. I'd reclaimed a budget, and with it, my agency. And the applause that once rang in my ears had been replaced by something better: silence. The kind that comes when you stop paying for lies and start investing in yourself. The fallout didn't arrive all at once. It leaked. At first, it was small things: missed payments, delayed responses, excuses that didn't quite land. The apartment he'd kept pristine began to empty, not dramatically, but quietly. Furniture listed online. Utilities shut off one by one. The life he'd curated started to look temporary. He called more often, not angry anymore, anxious. We need to talk about logistics, he said. We need to be reasonable. We need to think long-term. We had disappeared the moment I stopped paying. I kept my responses brief, written, documented. I didn't argue facts. I didn't debate morality. I didn't try to make him understand. People who live comfortably inside deception don't need explanations. They need consequences. The other woman tried again. This time, she emailed. She said she'd been misled. She said she'd been promised stability. She said she didn't know the money came from me. I believed she hadn't known everything. I also knew she hadn't asked. I didn't reply. Because women aren't required to console each other over a man's choices, especially when one of us has already paid the bill. The divorce paperwork moved faster than I expected. Once the finances were separated, the fog lifted. His income alone didn't stretch the way he'd promised everyone it would. The image cracked. Mutual friends noticed. He seems different, someone said carefully. Stressed, another added. Not himself. I nodded. Changed the subject. At work, his promotion stalled. Success built on hidden subsidies rarely survives exposure. When the company realized the balance they'd applauded was unsustainable, the admiration cooled. Quietly, professionally. No one announced it. They didn't need to. One evening, he showed up unannounced. Again. I'm not asking for forgiveness, he said quickly, standing in my doorway like a man bargaining with a locked door. I'm asking for help. I studied him, really studied him. For years, I'd mistaken need for intimacy, responsibility for love, support for partnership. Not anymore. I helped, I said calmly. For years. You just didn't call it that. He swallowed. I can't afford both places. I know, I replied. That's why I stopped. He stared at me, incredulous. You're just going to let everything fall apart? I shrugged. It was never mine to hold together. He left without another word. That night, I went through old photos. Not to mourn, but to reclaim. Vacations I'd planned, moments I'd funded, smiles that now looked rehearsed. I didn't delete them. I archived them. Because erasing the past doesn't heal you. Understanding it does. What surprised me most was how quickly my life expanded once I stopped financing someone else's. My savings grew. My stress shrank. My time felt like my own again. I redecorated my space, not extravagantly, but intentionally. Furniture I chose, colors I liked, silence I didn't have to explain. And in that quiet, I realized something I'd never allowed myself to consider. I wasn't naive. I had been generous. There's a difference. One is a flaw. The other is a strength, until someone abuses it. He had mistaken my generosity for permanence. He was wrong. The unraveling didn't make headlines. It didn't even make gossip columns. It happened in the quiet spaces where money meets reality. His name came off the lease first. Not ceremoniously, just a notice, taped to a door he no longer had access to. The apartment that had once been presented as his sanctuary became a problem to solve. Storage units replaced closets. Credit cards declined at inconvenient moments. The illusion of ease evaporated. He tried to keep the two lives separate. That was the mistake. Once the funding stopped, everything overlapped. Work stress bled into personal calls. Personal problems showed up as missed meetings. The calm, controlled version of him, the one his colleagues admired, began to crack under pressure he'd never actually carried alone before. People noticed. Not dramatically, subtly. He started arriving late, leaving early, snapping in meetings. The stories about sacrifice didn't land the same way once they were no longer supported by results. The other woman moved out quietly. No confrontation, no announcement, just absence. The kind that tells you the terms of the arrangement were clearer than anyone wanted to admit. He told people it was mutual. I didn't correct him. I didn't correct anyone anymore. Because the truth was no longer mine to defend. The divorce finalized without fireworks. He expected a fight. Over money, over optics, over control. What he got instead was efficiency. I didn't argue over furniture. I didn't demand explanations. I didn't relitigate the past. I took what was mine and left the rest exactly where it belonged, with him. That confused him more than anger ever could. You're acting like none of this mattered, he said once, during a brief exchange of documents. I met his eyes. It mattered enough to end it. That was the only explanation he got. Afterward, my life reorganized itself with surprising speed. Expenses dropped. Savings stabilized. I stopped bracing for financial emergencies that were never actually emergencies, just ongoing drains disguised as obligations. I learned how much energy I'd spent maintaining a balance sheet that wasn't mutual. Friends commented on the change. "You seem lighter," they said. I was. Not because I'd won, but because I'd stopped losing in small, constant ways. The most unexpected moment came months later when I received an invitation to another industry event. The same company, different quarter. I declined. Not out of bitterness, out of clarity. I didn't need to sit in rooms where my presence was used to validate someone else's narrative. I had learned something crucial that night in the ballroom, watching my own money projected onto a screen while strangers applauded. Success that requires your silence is not success you benefit from. Partnership that treats your resources as invisible is not partnership. And betrayal doesn't always come with secrecy. Sometimes it comes with confidence. He had never hidden the apartment. He had hidden the assumption that I would always pay for what I didn't know. That assumption died the moment I recognized my own handwriting in his expense reports. I didn't confront the company. I didn't expose him publicly. I didn't warn the woman. I simply removed the support and watched the structure reveal exactly what it was. People sometimes ask how I stayed so calm when I found out. The answer is simple. Shock doesn't always look like screaming. Sometimes it looks like focus. Sometimes it looks like realizing that the life you thought you were building had already been spent elsewhere, and deciding not to fund the sequel. By the time he understood what he'd lost, it wasn't the apartment or the money or the image. It was the certainty that someone else would always make it work for him. And that certainty was the most expensive thing he'd ever owned. The last thing that disappeared wasn't the apartment. It was the applause. Months later, I ran into one of his colleagues at a coffee shop. We exchanged polite hellos, the kind that pretend nothing complicated ever existed between two lives. "He's adjusting," she said carefully, as if testing the word. "Things changed after the promotion." I nodded. "They usually do." She hesitated. "That night, at the celebration, you seemed so calm." I smiled. I had clarity. She didn't ask what I meant. She didn't need to. Because clarity has a way of settling into your posture, your voice, the way you stop explaining yourself. I moved into a new place that fit my life instead of subsidizing someone else's. Smaller, brighter, intentionally mine. I furnished it slowly, paid for things once, chose quality over illusion. Every purchase felt different when I knew exactly who it was for. I stopped flinching when my bank app opened, stopped scanning statements for surprises, stopped bracing for emergencies that were never emergencies, just someone else's entitlement. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was honest. He tried once more to reach out. Not to apologize. He was never good at that. But to reminisce. To soften the ending. To pretend the years had simply grown us apart. I didn't take the call, because the years hadn't grown us apart. They had funded him forward. And when that funding stopped, so did the illusion of who he was. I never told anyone at his company what I'd discovered. I never corrected the applause or clarified the narrative. Not because I was protecting him, but because I didn't need the truth to be public to be effective. Truth doesn't need a stage, it needs daylight. They thanked him for his success, for his sacrifices, for the balance he'd found under pressure. They just didn't know the balance sheet. They didn't know that the apartment on the screen, the life that kept him grounded, had been quietly paid for by the woman standing in the audience, clapping politely. Already done. At my husband's work celebration, I learned I'd been paying for another woman's life. I didn't scream. I didn't confront. I didn't compete. I closed the account. And with it, I closed the chapter where my generosity was mistaken for obligation. Some betrayals cost you love. This one taught me the price of my silence and the value of withdrawing it. And that lesson, once learned, never needs to be paid for again.